Sit back, relax, and welcome to Reading Hours. Today's book is Divergent by Veronica Roth. Please let us know in the comments from where you are watching, or if there is a book you want us to summarize in future. Divergent, published in 2011, is a thrilling dystopian novel that captured the imaginations of millions of readers worldwide. Set in a futuristic society divided into rigid factions, the book explores themes of identity, choice, and rebellion against oppressive systems. Roth wrote Divergent while still in college, and its compelling narrative quickly gained traction, launching a best-selling trilogy and a major motion picture adaptation. The world of Divergent is structured around 5 factions, each embodying a particular virtue: abnegation, selflessness; dauntless, bravery; erudite, intelligence; amity, peacefulness; and candor, honesty. At the age of 16, every citizen must take an aptitude test that determines which faction they are most suited for, but ultimately, the choice is theirs. However, for protagonist Beatrice Pryor, the test does not yield a single definitive result. Instead, she is classified as divergent, meaning she does not fit neatly into any one faction. This discovery puts her in grave danger, as divergents are seen as threats to the rigid societal order. As Triss navigates the brutal initiation process of the Dauntless faction, she uncovers a deeper conspiracy that threatens not only her survival, but the entire structure of their world. The novel's gripping action, intense character development, and thought-provoking themes have made it a cornerstone of the young adult dystopian genre. Let's begin with the summary. The sky is a dull shade of gray as Beatrice Pryor stands before the mirror, watching her mother trim her hair. It is the only time she is allowed to see her reflection, a rare privilege in the abnegation faction, where selflessness is valued above all else. She studies herself, noting her narrow face and large, watchful eyes, but there is little time to dwell on vanity. Today is the day of the aptitude test, the day that will determine where she truly belongs. In the world Beatrice inhabits, society is divided into 5 factions, each representing a core virtue. Abnegation upholds selflessness, dauntless values bravery, erudite seeks knowledge, amity cherishes peace, and candor honors honesty. At 16, every citizen must take a test that reveals which faction they are best suited for. The result is meant to guide their choice at the upcoming choosing ceremony, where they will decide their fate, whether to remain with their families or abandon everything they have ever known to join a new way of life. Beatrice knows where she is supposed to belong. She has been raised in abnegation, where self-sacrifice is a way of life, where mirrors are scarce, and where personal desires are cast aside for the good of others. But deep down, she has always felt different. She has never found it easy to suppress her thoughts or silence the selfish urges that creep in when she watches the reckless, dauntless leap from moving trains or sees the confident way erudite citizens speak their minds. She has spent her life pretending she belongs, but today she will learn the truth. At school, the students file into the testing rooms one by one. Each will be administered a serum that induces a simulation, a series of controlled hallucinations designed to assess their instincts. When Beatrice's name is called, she steps forward, heart pounding. Inside the sterile white room, she meets Tori, her dauntless test administrator, who prepares the serum and explains that she will be placed in a series of hypothetical situations. She must act naturally. There are no right or wrong answers, only her reactions. Beatrice takes the serum and the world shifts. She finds herself in an unfamiliar space, facing a mirrored reflection of herself. In front of her are two objects, a knife and a piece of meat. A voice growls behind her, and she turns to see a fierce dog, teeth bared, preparing to attack. Instinctively, she lowers herself to the ground, making herself small and unthreatening. The dog hesitates, then relaxes. It is a test of her ability to handle fear, and she has passed, until the dog lunges again, its aggression renewed. Before she can react, the scene dissolves, and she finds herself sitting before a stranger offering her a choice between a bus seat and standing. She hesitates before choosing to give up her seat, a decision that aligns with abnegation values. Then, the simulation ends. Tori watches her carefully, her expression unreadable. Something is wrong. Beatrice's test did not produce a single result, as it should have. Instead, she exhibited qualities from multiple factions: abnegation, dauntless, and erudite. She is divergent. Tori immediately warns her to keep this information to herself. Being divergent is dangerous. It means she does not fit neatly into the structured system, and those in power do not tolerate unpredictability. If anyone finds out, she could be in danger. Confused and unsettled, Beatrice leaves the testing room, her mind reeling. She has spent her life preparing for a single choice, but now she knows she does not belong solely to one faction. She is something else entirely. That night, she lies awake in her small, bare room, the weight of the secret pressing down on her. She cannot tell her parents, and she does not dare confide in her brother, Caleb, who seems destined for abnegation with his quiet, obedient nature. She is alone with her knowledge, and with the choosing ceremony looming, she has a decision to make. The day of the ceremony arrives, and the entire city gathers in the hub, an ancient structure that once served as Chicago's Sears Tower. The faction leaders stand at the front, overseeing the ritual as each 16-year-old steps forward, one by one, to choose their future. A bowl representing each faction sits before them, and they must cut their palms, letting their blood fall into the bowl of their chosen faction. When Caleb's name is called, Beatrice expects him to stay in abnegation. But as he steps forward, he shocks everyone, including her, by choosing erudite. A ripple of whispers spreads through the crowd. Their father, a staunch supporter of abnegation and a critic of erudite's thirst for power, looks devastated. Beatrice's heart pounds as her name is called. She walks toward the stage, past the bowls, past the weight of her family's expectations. She hesitates, the blade hovering over her palm. The simple choice would be to follow her parents, to stay where she knows what is expected of her. But she cannot ignore the truth of what she is, what she wants. In a moment of finality, she slices her hand and lets her blood drip into the bowl of burning coals. Dauntless. The moment the blood hits the coals, the faction cheers, wild and fearless. She steps away from the podium, her fate sealed. She does not look back. She is no longer Beatrice Pryor of abnegation. She has chosen a new life, a new identity. She is now Triss. As the ceremony concludes, the newly chosen Dauntless initiates are ushered toward the exit. There is no time for goodbyes, no chance to explain. The Dauntless begin running, and Triss follows, her heart hammering. This is the beginning of something new, something terrifying and exhilarating. She has taken her first step into a world that will test her in ways she never imagined, and there is no turning back. Triss runs with the Dauntless initiates, her breath coming in short gasps as they spill onto the street outside the hub. The moment they are outside, the Dauntless leaders waste no time. A train thunders down the tracks above them, and the initiates are expected to keep up. Triss watches in shock as the older Dauntless members begin to run, their pace accelerating until they leap onto the moving train. There is no explanation, no moment to hesitate. Triss forces herself forward, her legs burning as she sprints to keep up. The train is moving faster than she thought possible, and the sight of others launching themselves into its open cars makes her stomach twist. She gathers all the courage she has, pushes off the ground, and grabs onto the edge of the train car, her fingers barely catching the metal edge. Someone grabs her wrist and pulls her inside. Gasping for breath, she looks up to see a girl with short black hair and a friendly smile, Christina, a candor transfer. As Triss regains her breath, she realizes she is surrounded by other initiates, some exhilarated, others terrified. Among them is a cruel-looking boy from Candor named Peter, who wastes no time sneering at the others, already establishing himself as a threat. Edward and Myra, two erudite transfers, seem more composed, while Al, a massive boy from Candor, looks nauseated. Christina introduces herself, her quick wit and confidence making Triss feel an instant sense of companionship. The train barrels toward the Dauntless compound, but there is another challenge ahead, getting off. No one tells them what to do, but Triss sees the Dauntless-born initiates already positioning themselves near the edge of the train car. They leap off effortlessly as the compound comes into view. Christina goes first, rolling onto the ground with a wince. Triss hesitates, then jumps, landing hard but uninjured. Al, however, miscalculates, hitting the ground with a painful thud. The initiates barely have time to recover before they are herded toward a gaping hole in a rooftop. The Dauntless-born members cheer and laugh as they jump through the opening without hesitation. Max, one of the Dauntless leaders, watches the initiates, waiting for them to follow. A new voice emerges, Eric, a Dauntless leader with cold eyes and a calculating demeanor. He mocks the initiates, pushing them to act. One of the Dauntless-born boys smirks. Who's going first? The silence that follows is suffocating. Triss's heart pounds in her chest as she watches the others hesitate. No one wants to be the first to take the leap into the unknown. Something within her stirs, a need to prove herself, to show that she belongs here. She steps forward. "I'll go," she says. The Dauntless-born initiates cheer, and Eric raises an eyebrow, surprised. Without giving herself time to second-guess, Triss climbs onto the ledge, looks down into the darkness, and jumps. The air rushes past her, her stomach twisting into knots, and then impact. She crashes into a net stretched across the cavern below. A pair of strong hands reaches out to help her, and she looks up into the face of a boy with sharp features and dark eyes. He pulls her up with ease and smirks. "What's your name?" he asks. "Triss," she says. A flicker of amusement crosses his face. "First jumper, Triss." He calls out, and the Dauntless members around him cheer. The boy introduces himself as Four, one of the Dauntless instructors. He leads her away as more initiates land in the net behind her. Christina follows soon after, laughing at her own recklessness. The last to jump is Al, who barely manages to push himself off the ledge, his fear evident in his face. With the initiates gathered, 4 leads them through the underground compound, a massive series of tunnels and corridors built into the ruins of old Chicago. The walls are lined with torches, the floors uneven and gritty. The space is unlike anything Triss has ever seen, wild and unrefined, a stark contrast to the quiet order of abnegation. Soon, the initiates reach the pit, the central area of the Dauntless compound. It is a massive underground chasm filled with glowing lights, crisscrossing pathways, and ledges where people sit, eat, and talk. In the distance, a roaring fire burns near a pit of blackened coals. The entire space hums with energy, laughter, movement, chaos. Triss can't help but feel a thrill of excitement. The group is then led to the dormitory, a large, open room filled with rows of beds. Unlike abnegation, where personal space and comfort are sacrificed for the greater good, the Dauntless initiates sleep together, their belongings scattered haphazardly. There is no privacy here. Before long, Eric returns, his sharp gaze scanning the group. "Tomorrow, training begins," he announces. "You will be ranked based on your performance. The lowest ranked initiates will be cut." The words send a ripple of unease through the group. Being cut means factionlessness, a fate worse than death for most. The factionless wander the city, outcasts who belong nowhere, doomed to survive on scraps and charity. The pressure is immediate, suffocating. That night, Triss lies awake, staring at the ceiling. The reality of her decision is sinking in. She is no longer Beatrice Pryor, the quiet girl from abnegation. She has chosen Dauntless, and she must prove that she belongs. But as she replays the events of the day, she knows one thing for certain: she is afraid. Afraid of failing, of being weak, afraid of the unknown challenges that lie ahead. But there is no going back now. She has made her choice, and she will fight to survive. Morning comes quickly, and the Dauntless compound roars to life with the sound of boots against stone, voices echoing through the underground corridors. Triss wakes to the sight of initiates rushing to get ready, pulling on the black clothes provided for them. The reality of where she is and what is expected of her hits her fully now. This is no ordinary initiation. This is a battle for survival. After a quick breakfast in the noisy dining hall, the initiates are herded into the training room, a vast open space lined with punching bags, wooden dummies, and racks of knives and guns. The walls are covered in scuff marks, bloodstains, and dents from previous fights. This is where they will learn to become dauntless. 4 and Eric stand before them, contrasting figures. 4 is quiet, composed, his presence commanding respect without demanding it. Eric, on the other hand, exudes cold authority, his sharp eyes scanning them like prey. It is Eric who speaks first. "You are no longer protected by your old factions," he says, his voice cutting through the murmurs. "Your past does not matter here. You are all equals now, but that won't last. By the end of initiation, you will be ranked. Those who fail will be cut." The word "cut" lingers ominously. It means being factionless, doomed to a life of scavenging and suffering. The tension in the room tightens like a noose. The training is divided into 3 stages. 4 continues, his voice steady. Physical, mental, and final testing. We start with the physical. The first task is simple, hand-to-hand combat. Or at least, it seems simple. But for someone like Triss, small, untrained, and coming from a faction that discouraged violence, it is anything but. One by one, initiates are paired off. Triss watches as Edward, a quiet but skilled erudite transfer, takes down his opponent with a calculated precision that makes it clear he has trained before. Christina fights with confidence, her candor upbringing giving her a natural boldness. But when it is Triss's turn, her stomach twists. She is paired with Peter. The moment she steps into the ring, she knows she is at a disadvantage. Peter is taller, stronger, and his smirk is dripping with cruelty. He sees her as an easy victory. The fight begins. Triss barely dodges the first hit before Peter's fist crashes into her stomach, sending her stumbling backward. She grits her teeth, forcing herself to stay on her feet. The pain is sharp, but she pushes through it. She throws a punch of her own, but Peter blocks it with ease. Then he strikes again, this time hitting her in the jaw so hard that her vision blurs. She collapses to the ground. The room spins around her, and she barely registers the sound of Eric's voice calling the match. The humiliation burns almost as much as the pain. Lying there, gasping for breath, Triss understands something crucial: she is weak. At least for now. But weakness in Dauntless is not an option. Later that day, as she nurses her bruises, Christina pulls her aside. "You can't let him get to you," she says. "You have to fight smarter, not harder." Triss nods, but she doesn't say what she's really thinking, that brute strength alone will never be enough for her. If she wants to survive, she has to adapt. The next few days blur into a cycle of pain and exhaustion. The initiates fight, train, and push themselves to the limit. Some thrive, like Peter, whose arrogance only grows with every victory. Others struggle. Al, despite his massive size, lacks the aggression needed to dominate in combat. He hesitates, afraid of hurting people, and it costs him. At night, Triss lies awake in the dormitory, feeling every bruise and aching muscle. But she refuses to give up. She refuses to fail. The next major test comes when 4 introduces them to knife throwing. He demonstrates with ease, sending a knife spinning through the air and embedding it perfectly in the target. The initiates take turns trying, but few come close to his precision. Triss grips the knife, her fingers tense. She throws, but it clatters to the ground, far from the target. Eric watches, unimpressed. "Useless," he mutters. A cruel idea takes root in his mind. He turns to Al, who had been struggling more than anyone. "Stand in front of the target," Eric orders. Al's eyes widen in horror. "What?" "You heard me," Eric says. "Let's see if your fellow initiates can actually hit something under pressure." Al hesitates, but when Eric steps closer, his voice low and threatening, he obeys. He walks to the target, standing stiffly against the wood. Triss's stomach churns. This is wrong. Eric calls on her next. "Your turn, stiff." Triss swallows hard. She can see the fear in Al's eyes. The others watch in tense silence. 4 steps forward. "This isn't training," he says coolly. "This is cruelty," Eric sneers. "Are you saying she's not dauntless enough to do it?" Triss knows she has no choice. If she refuses, she'll be seen as weak. Her hands shake as she grips the knife. She throws, missing by several inches. Eric scoffs. "Again," he orders. Triss breathes in deeply and throws again. This time, the blade nicks the target closer than before. Eric smirks. Better, but Triss isn't relieved. She knows what this really is, a test, not of skill, but of obedience. And she has just played into Eric's hands. That night, as the initiates sit together in the pit, Christina whispers, "He's testing us, seeing who's willing to do anything to stay in Dauntless." Triss nods. She understands now, Dauntless is not just about bravery. It's about control. And not everyone in charge has good intentions. As she sits there, the firelight flickering across her bruised skin, she makes a silent vow. She will survive this initiation, but she will do it on her own terms. The days that follow are grueling. The first stage of Dauntless training continues, each day a relentless test of endurance, skill, and pain tolerance. Triss wakes up sore and exhausted, her muscles aching from constant beatings in the fighting ring. She's getting better, though. She still isn't the strongest, but she's learning how to move faster, hit smarter, and avoid attacks before they land. Combat training remains brutal. Triss watches as Peter, her greatest tormentor, dominates every fight with a vicious efficiency. Edward, another transfer from Erudite, is one of the few who can match him. Their rivalry simmers beneath every exchange, and when they finally face each other in the ring, the fight is intense. Edward holds his own, striking with speed and calculation, but Peter is stronger and crueler. The match ends in blood, but Edward remains standing, an undeniable challenge to Peter's status at the top. Meanwhile, Al continues to struggle. His hesitance, his unwillingness to truly hurt others, makes him a target. He's already ranked near the bottom, and Triss worries about what will happen if he doesn't improve. The fear of being cut looms over them all, a constant shadow pressing down on the initiates. One evening, after another exhausting day, Triss, Christina, and will sit in the pit, watching the firelight flicker across the walls. The pit is always buzzing with life, Dauntless members laughing, drinking, playing games, living without restraint. Christina nudges Triss. "You know what we need, a break." Will grins. "Agreed. What do Dauntless do for fun anyway?" Christina smirks. "I heard about something. A little adventure." That's how they end up standing at the edge of a massive ledge, staring into the dark abyss of the Dauntless compound. A zip line stretches across the cavernous space, connecting two towering structures. Below, everything is swallowed by shadows. A group of older Dauntless members, real Dauntless, not initiates, stand nearby, laughing and goading each other on as they take turns clipping themselves onto the zip line and leaping into the void. Triss watches, fascinated as they disappear into the darkness, only to emerge seconds later, soaring above the compound, whooping with exhilaration. Christina turns to her. "You in?" Triss hesitates only a second before nodding. This reckless, thrilling moment, this is what Dauntless is supposed to be about. One by one, they clip onto the zip line. Christina goes first, screaming in delight as she vanishes into the dark. Then Will, then Triss. The second she steps off the ledge, gravity yanks her downward. The wind rushes past her ears, roaring as she plummets before the line catches and sends her soaring forward. The city blurs below her, the Dauntless compound shrinking into a mass of glowing lights. For a moment, everything else, her bruises, her fears, the weight of initiation fades away. She feels free. When she lands, stumbling slightly as her feet hit the ground, Christina and Will are already waiting, grinning. "That," Will says breathlessly, "was incredible." Triss nods, a rare smile tugging at her lips. Yeah, it was. For the first time since she arrived, she feels something close to belonging. But the harsh reality of Dauntless life is never far away. That night, Triss is jolted awake by a scream. She scrambles upright just as the dormitory erupts into chaos. People are shouting, moving frantically. Triss pushes her way through the crowd, her stomach twisting with dread. Then she sees him. Edward is on the floor, clutching his face, blood seeping through his fingers. A knife protrudes from his eye. He's screaming, writhing in agony. Myra, his girlfriend, kneels beside him, sobbing. Triss's breath catches. This wasn't a fight. This was an attack. The initiates look around, eyes wide, searching for the culprits. But Triss already knows. Peter. It has to be Peter. No one says it aloud, but the truth is written across their faces. Peter, or one of his lackeys, did this to eliminate Edward as competition, to make sure no one threatened his rank. Myra's sobs fill the air as the Dauntless leaders arrive. Four pushes his way through, his eyes scanning the scene before he kneels beside Edward. His usual composure is gone, replaced by something colder, harder. "You need to go to the infirmary," he says quietly. Edward groans in pain but doesn't resist as Four and another leader help him to his feet. Blood drips onto the floor as they lead him away. The initiates stand in stunned silence. No one says a word. The next morning, Edward is gone. Myra too. They've left Dauntless. That's when Triss understands this is more than just a competition. It's survival. And if she isn't careful, she could be next. She tightens her fists. She won't let that happen. The attack on Edward sends shockwaves through the initiates. No one speaks about it, but the tension in the dormitory is suffocating. Triss notices the way some of the other initiates avoid Peter's gaze, how they move out of his way in the hallways, as if proximity alone might make them his next victim. Al, in particular, seems more withdrawn than ever, his broad shoulders slumped, his usual awkward cheerfulness gone. Despite everything, the training continues. The first stage of initiation is over, and the second stage is something entirely different, psychological. Triss and the others are led into a new section of the Dauntless compound, an underground network of hallways that smell faintly of antiseptic and something metallic, something almost like blood. This is where they will face their fears. Four stands in front of them, arms crossed, his expression unreadable. The next stage of initiation is about confronting what scares you. We all have things we fear. The only way to master them is to face them. He gestures toward a door. Inside is a simulation. It will be different for everyone. The serum will trigger hallucinations of your worst fears. The only way out is to calm yourself, to control your reactions. Fear makes you weak. Learning to overcome it makes you strong. The initiates exchange nervous glances. Triss swallows hard. One by one, they are called in. Triss listens as Christina goes first, then Will. Each time, the waiting initiates hear nothing from beyond the door. The simulations are private, existing only in the subject's mind. Finally, Triss hears her name. She steps forward, trying to keep her face neutral as she enters the small, sterile-looking room. Four stands beside a chair, a syringe in hand. "Sit," he says. Triss obeys. The needle pricks her neck, a brief sting, and then the world around her begins to melt. Suddenly, she is standing in an open field. The sky is endless, stretching above her in an infinite blue expanse. But something is wrong. The ground beneath her shifts, and when she looks down, she sees that she is not standing on solid earth, she is standing on glass. Beneath the glass, there is nothing. Just an abyss, stretching downward into darkness. Then the glass begins to crack. Panic grips her as the fractures spread, splintering beneath her feet. She tries to move, but every step she takes sends more cracks spiraling outward. The emptiness below calls to her, waiting to swallow her whole. She clenches her fists. This isn't real. It's a simulation. Four said the only way out is to control your fear. She forces herself to breathe, to slow her pounding heart. The glass is just glass. It's not breaking. It can't hurt her. The cracks stop spreading. The glass beneath her steadies. Then, suddenly, the scene shifts. She is trapped inside a glass box. The walls press in on her from all sides, sealing her inside. At first, it is just confinement, but then the box starts to fill with water. The level rises quickly. Cold liquid sloshes around her ankles, then her knees. She pounds on the glass, but it doesn't budge. The water keeps rising. Her breath comes faster, panic clawing at her throat as the water reaches her chin, then her lips, then she stops. This is another fear, another illusion. She closes her eyes, forces herself to breathe as steadily as she can. The water isn't real. It can't drown her. The instant she accepts it, the water vanishes. Triss gasps, finding herself back in the chair, her heartbeat still pounding in her ears. Four watches her with quiet intensity. "You did well," he says. She exhales sharply, her hands still trembling. "How long was I in there?" "A few minutes. A few minutes." It felt like an eternity. As she walks out, she hears Four speaking to one of the other instructors, his voice low. "She's different," he says. "She moved through the simulation too fast." Triss pretends not to hear, but inside, her stomach knots. She moved through the fear simulation faster than anyone else. That means she doesn't react the way she's supposed to. That means she's not normal. That means she's divergent. And if anyone finds out, she's dead. The fear simulations become the new normal, pushing the initiates deeper into their own worst nightmares. Every day, Triss finds herself confronting terrors she never even knew she had, being burned alive, being unable to save those she cares about, being powerless. But each time she forces herself to remember the truth. It's not real. The simulations are just tricks of the mind, meant to test her ability to control her emotions. And each time, she moves through them faster than the others. She knows she should be more careful, but the instinct to survive is stronger. She tries to slow down, to react the way a normal Dauntless initiate would, but she can tell Four notices. Every time she emerges from a simulation, she sees the way he watches her, his eyes filled with something unreadable. He knows something is different about her. One evening, as she's walking back from training, he corners her in one of the dim hallways of the Dauntless compound. "You're divergent, aren't you?" His voice is quiet, but the weight of his words makes Triss's stomach drop. She freezes. The word alone is enough to make her pulse race. Divergent, the word that could get her killed. "I don't know what you're talking about," she says carefully. Four steps closer, lowering his voice even more. "You're moving through the simulations too fast. You manipulate them like you know they aren't real." Triss swallows hard. She has no idea what to say, how to respond. If Four wanted to, he could turn her in right now. But then his expression softens. "I'm not going to tell anyone," he says, "but you need to be careful. The Dauntless leaders are watching." She exhales, relief flooding her, but the warning lingers. If Four noticed, others could too. That night, she barely sleeps. Instead, she lies awake in her bunk, staring at the ceiling, thinking about what it means to be divergent. Why is it so dangerous? What happens to people like her? The only thing she knows for sure is that whatever the answer is, it's something the leaders don't want anyone to find out. A few days later, the initiates get their rankings. Triss stares at the board in disbelief. She's climbed higher than she ever expected, high enough to secure a spot in Dauntless. Christina is right behind her, and isn't far down the list either. But at the bottom, in the lowest ranked positions, are Peter and Al. Peter, for the first time, looks furious. His eyes burn with something dangerous. He's used to being on top, used to intimidating his way to success. But now, with Triss outranking him, she knows he won't let it go. Al, on the other hand, just looks defeated. He's been struggling for weeks, unable to match the aggression and violence the others display. Tris has seen the fear in his eyes, the way he hesitates before throwing a punch. And now, it's clear that hesitation has cost him everything. That night, Tris wakes to whispers in the dark. She doesn't move, just listens. The voices are low, urgent. "She made us look weak," one of them says. "Peter, we have to do something about it," another voice murmurs. Her pulse spikes. Slowly, she shifts her position, trying to see through the darkness. And then, before she can react, hands grab her. She thrashes, but there are too many of them. A cloth covers her mouth, muffling her scream. She kicks, struggles, but they drag her from her bed, out of the dormitory, into the cold, empty halls of the Dauntless compound. They shove her against a railing. Her heart pounds wildly. Below, the chasm roars, water crashing against the jagged rocks. "You think you're better than us," Peter hisses. A hand presses against her back, pushing her forward. Tris gasps, twisting, struggling to break free. Then another voice. "Stop." The pressure on her back disappears. Tris blinks, gasping for breath, and turns to see Four standing at the end of the hallway. His face is a mask of quiet fury. Peter hesitates, then takes a step back. "We were just having some fun," he sneers. Four doesn't move, doesn't blink. "Go back to the dorms, now." There's something in his voice, something deadly. Peter, after a moment, scowls and disappears into the darkness, the others following behind him. Tris sags against the railing, her entire body shaking. Four steps closer. "Are you okay?" She nods, but she's lying. She isn't okay. She almost died. And she knows now, without a doubt, that she isn't safe. Tris spends the next morning nursing bruises, both on her body and in her mind. She should have known Peter and his lackeys would retaliate after the rankings came out. They've been watching her climb higher, surpassing them, making them look weak in front of the instructors. But last night was different. It wasn't just about beating her in a fight. They wanted to throw her into the chasm, to kill her. And Al had been with them. The betrayal stings more than the bruises. She remembers how he used to be her friend, how he would laugh at his own clumsiness, how he tried to be kind despite the brutality of dauntless training. But last night, he had been one of them, standing with Peter and Drew as they tried to silence her. She isn't sure if it was fear or jealousy that made him do it. Either way, he made his choice. At breakfast, the tension in the cafeteria is suffocating. The initiates eat in silence, but Tris can feel eyes on her. Christina and will sit close, their presence comforting, though they don't know what happened. Across the room, Peter glares at her with barely contained hatred. Al sits at the farthest table, hunched over, avoiding her gaze. A shadow falls over her. "Four. Come with me," he says, his voice low. She follows him through the compound, down a narrow hallway she hasn't been in before. He stops and turns to face her. "You have to be careful," he says. Tris crosses her arms. "I didn't do anything." Four shakes his head. "That's the problem. You're too good. You're drawing attention, and attention is dangerous for someone like you." Someone like you. The words settle over her like a heavy weight. Divergent. She doesn't respond. She can't. Four's eyes flicker with something like concern. "You need to be smarter, Tris. You can't trust everyone here, and you can't afford to make enemies this early." She knows he's right. But the truth is, it might be too late for that. Later that day, the next stage of initiation begins, the fear landscapes. Unlike the previous simulations, which focused on a single fear at a time, the fear landscape is a deeper test. Each initiate will be injected with the simulation's serum and forced to face multiple fears in a row, with no warning, no escape except to find a way to control their emotions. Tris is one of the last to go. She watches as the others emerge from the simulation room, some pale and shaking, others sweating, struggling to control their breathing. Even Christina, usually so confident, looks shaken. Finally, it's her turn. She sits in the chair, feels the needle prick her neck, and then darkness. Then fire. The flames rise around her, heat licking at her skin. She is trapped, nowhere to run. The fire crackles, smoke filling her lungs. She clenches her fists. It's not real. The fire flickers, then disappears. The scene shifts. She is standing on the edge of a cliff, the wind howling around her. Below, there is nothing but darkness. Then her body is falling, plummeting into the abyss. She gasps, heart racing, the air rushing past her, then she stops. Midair, it isn't real. The darkness fades. Next, she is surrounded by hands grabbing, clawing at her. She can't move, can't breathe. Peter's voice whispers in her ear, laughing. You think you're better than us. A surge of panic, then anger. She shoves back, pushes against the hands. They vanish. Finally, she finds herself standing in front of a gun. The cold metal presses against her forehead. A faceless figure stands behind it, finger on the trigger. Then she recognizes him. It's her father. Tris, he says, his voice trembling. Why did you do this? He doesn't say what this is. But she knows. She left abnegation. She chose Dauntless. She betrayed her family. The gun shakes in his hands. I'm sorry, she whispers. She closes her eyes. The shot never comes. She blinks and she is back in the chair. 4 is watching her, arms crossed. 7 fears, he says. She blinks, confused. What? Most initiates have 15 or 20 fears in their landscape. You only have 7. She doesn't understand why that matters, but then she sees the way he's looking at her. The way he already knew before she even stepped into the room. 7 fears. Fewer than most, because she's divergent, and he knows. Tris stares at 4, her mind spinning. He knows. He's known for a while now. That's why he's been watching her so closely, why he's been warning her to be careful. She wants to ask him how, wants to know what this means for her, but the words stick in her throat. You manipulated the fear landscape, he says, his voice calm but firm. You found ways to break the illusions too quickly, just like in the previous simulations. That's not normal. Tris swallows hard. What happens now? 4 tilts his head, considering her. That depends on how well you hide it. The warning is clear. If she's not careful, if she's not convincing enough, someone else will notice. Someone dangerous. And then she'll be dead. She clenches her fists, forcing herself to stay composed. What would you do? She asks. Something flickers in 4's eyes. He hesitates before answering. I'd learn how to blend in. Before she can respond, the door to the simulation room opens, and Eric steps inside. His sharp, calculating gaze moves between them, lingering on Tris. She forces herself to stand straight, to look unfazed. Good work, Stiff, he says, smirking. You're full of surprises. His tone is casual, but Tris senses something else behind his words. Suspicion. She doesn't dare speak. Eric gives her one last, lingering look before turning to 4. G9 is coming tomorrow. She wants to see how the initiates are progressing. Make sure they're ready. Tris's stomach twists at the mention of G9 Matthews, the erudite leader. She's the one behind the smear campaign against abnegation. She's the one calling for a revolution, for new leadership in the city. And now she's coming here. Eric leaves without another word. The moment he's gone, 4 exhales sharply. G9 doesn't just check on initiates, he mutters. She's looking for something. Tris doesn't need to ask what. She already knows. G9 is hunting for divergence. The tension stays with her for the rest of the day. When she returns to the dormitory, the room is buzzing with nervous energy. Everyone knows about the visit tomorrow. Christina, sitting on her bed, groans. Great. As if this wasn't already stressful enough, Will shakes his head. She's probably here to make sure the best initiates are worthy of Dauntless. Or maybe to see if Dauntless is worthy of Erudite. The idea unsettles Triss. For years, the factions have stayed separate, each maintaining their own way of life. But now, G9 is inserting herself into Dauntless affairs. What is she planning? She tries to shake off the thought and focus on something else. But then she notices Al, sitting apart from the others. He looks worse than ever, his shoulders hunched, his face pale and hollow. He meets her gaze for only a second before looking away. A memory flashes through her mind, Al's hands pinning her down, his voice whispering apologies as Peter and Drew tried to kill her. Something inside her hardens. She turns away from him and doesn't look back. That night, she wakes to the sound of footsteps. She blinks in the darkness, disoriented. The dorm is quiet, but someone is moving toward the door. Al. She watches as he slips outside, his movements slow, heavy. For a moment, she considers following him. But then she closes her eyes and lets him go. The next morning, she wakes to whispers. Something is wrong. Christina's face is pale. Did you hear? She whispers. Triss shakes her head. Christina swallows hard. Al's dead. The words hit her like a punch. They found his body in the chasm. Suicide. She doesn't know how long she stands there, frozen. Al, who had once been her friend. Al, who had laughed with her, protected her. Al, who had betrayed her. And now he's gone. Apparently, he couldn't take it anymore, Will says quietly. The pressure, the rankings, everything. But Triss knows the truth. He couldn't take the guilt. Later, when she stands at the railing of the chasm, staring down at the rushing water, she feels no tears. She wants to cry, wants to feel something for him. But all she can think about is that night, his hands on her, his voice in her ear. Four finds her there. It's not your fault, he says. She doesn't respond. Al made his choices, Four continues. You're not responsible for them. She grips the railing, her knuckles white. I didn't want him dead, she whispers. I know. They stand there in silence for a long time. That night, the Dauntless hold a ceremony for him. They light a massive fire in the pit, the flames reaching toward the ceiling. People speak about Al, remembering the good things, the happy moments. Triss listens, but she doesn't say anything, because the boy they're talking about isn't the boy who tried to kill her. It isn't long before the ceremony ends. The fire dies down. People go back to their dorms. But Triss doesn't sleep, because G9 is coming. And she knows that if she's not careful, she could be next. The Dauntless compound hums with nervous energy as the initiates prepare for their final evaluations. The announcement from Eric still lingers in Triss's mind. The fear landscapes are the last hurdle. If she fails, she will be factionless. If she succeeds, she will be dauntless. But it is not just the test that unsettles her. It is G9 Matthew's presence in the compound. Triss watches as G9 moves through the hallways with an air of quiet authority. She is accompanied by a group of erudite scientists, all dressed in crisp blue clothing, their eyes scanning the initiates as though analyzing a series of experiments rather than human beings. Eric follows closely behind, nodding at whatever G9 says, his expression unreadable, but his posture unusually stiff. Even the other Dauntless leaders seem more controlled around her, their usual reckless bravado subdued. It isn't just a routine visit. Triss can feel it in her bones. G9 is here for a purpose. She exchanges a glance with Four, who stands beside her near the training room entrance. He has been watching G9 as closely as she has, his jaw tight. What is she really doing here? Triss murmurs. Four hesitates, then leans in slightly, speaking low enough so that no one else can hear. Testing the new serum. Triss blinks. What do you mean? The simulation serum, he clarifies. G9 has been working with the Dauntless leaders to improve it, make it stronger. She wants something that can control everyone. Triss's pulse quickens. The simulation serum is already powerful. It forces initiates to face their worst fears in an artificial landscape, manipulating their senses completely. But if G9 is trying to make it stronger, that can only mean one thing. She wants absolute control. She swallows hard. But why? 4's expression darkens. Because of people like you. Triss's breath catches in her throat. He doesn't have to say the word. She knows what he means. Divergence. People like her, people who don't fit neatly into one faction, who can manipulate the simulations, who can think independently. The serum doesn't work on them the way it does on others, and that makes them dangerous. G9 isn't just here to observe the initiates. She's here to find the divergence. Triss suddenly feels exposed, as if the very air in the room is pressing in on her. She forces herself to remain calm. She has spent weeks pretending to be just another Dauntless initiate. She has to keep up the act. G9's voice carries across the room as she speaks with Eric. How many have completed their training? Final stage begins tomorrow, Eric replies smoothly. Fear landscapes will determine the rankings. G9 nods, her gaze sweeping across the room. For the briefest moment, her eyes land on Triss. A cold shiver runs down Triss's spine. G9 moves on, but Triss doesn't let herself relax. Not yet. She's looking for something, Triss whispers to 4. 4 nods. And we need to make sure she doesn't find it. The rest of the day passes in a blur of routine training exercises, but an undeniable tension settles over the initiates. Everyone is thinking the same thing. The final test is approaching. Triss forces herself to stay focused, but unease simmers beneath her skin. At lunch, Christina stabs her fork into a piece of bread, shaking her head. I don't like this. That erudite woman gives me the creeps. Will, sitting across from her, raises an eyebrow. G9 Matthews. She's not just any erudite, she's the leader. She practically runs the government at this point. Exactly, Christina mutters. And why is she here anyway? Dauntless never needed erudite before. Triss doesn't say anything. She doesn't trust herself to. Al's absence is still fresh in everyone's minds. The guilt still lingers at the edges of their expressions. The boy who once wanted to be strong, who once laughed with them, is gone. Triss doesn't know how to feel. She pushes away from the table. I need some air. She walks through the compound aimlessly, her thoughts racing. She keeps replaying 4's words in her mind. G9 is refining the serum. She wants it to control everyone. But why? What is she planning? The pieces aren't fitting together yet, but something is coming. That night, she lies in bed, staring at the ceiling. She should be sleeping, preparing herself for the fear landscape test. But instead, her mind is consumed by unease. Then, in the silence of the dormitory, she hears footsteps. She turns her head slightly, watching as someone moves toward the door. It takes her a moment to realize it's 4. Without thinking, she slips out of bed and follows him. She trails him through the dimly lit hallways, careful to keep her distance. He moves with purpose, his shoulders tense. She isn't sure where he's going, but she has a feeling it has something to do with G9. He stops at a locked door, glancing around before producing a key and slipping inside. Triss hesitates only for a moment before stepping forward. She places her ear against the door, straining to listen. Ready to launch soon, a voice says. Triss freezes. It's Eric. G9 wants confirmation, Eric continues. We can't afford mistakes. We won't make any, another voice replies. 4, Triss's stomach tightens. We'll run another trial, Eric says. By tomorrow, we'll know for sure, a pause. Does she suspect anything? 4 asks. Not yet, Eric replies, but she will soon. Triss backs away from the door, her heart pounding. Whatever G9 is planning, 4 is trying to stop it. And that means Triss has to as well. She slips away before they can catch her. Tomorrow, the final stage of initiation begins. Tomorrow, everything changes. The day of the final test arrives, and the air in the Dauntless compound is charged with tension. Triss moves through the halls, her heart pounding, but her face is set in calm determination. She has come too far to fail now. Every step, every challenge, every moment of pain and loss has brought her here. She is not the same girl who walked into the choosing ceremony weeks ago, uncertain of where she belonged. She knows now she belongs to herself. The fear landscape test is designed to expose the deepest terrors of the initiates, trapping them in a simulation where their worst nightmares feel real. For most, these fears are predictable: heights, drowning, fire, confinement. But for Triss, the stakes are higher. As a Divergent, she can manipulate the simulation, see through the illusions, and adapt in ways the others cannot. If the wrong person notices, it could mean her death. She steps into the testing chamber, surrounded by erudite scientists and Dauntless leaders. G9 Matthews stands near the back, her cold blue eyes unreadable as she watches. Triss forces herself to focus. She cannot afford to make a mistake. The moment the serum enters her bloodstream, the world tilts and she is no longer in the room. Her first fear is drowning. Water rises rapidly around her, threatening to consume her. Panic grips her for a fleeting second, but she reminds herself it isn't real. She forces herself to breathe, and the illusion shatters. Next, she is in a glass box, the walls closing in. The air grows thin, suffocating her. She wills the glass to crack, and it does. Another test passed. The fears continue being burned alive, facing an armed attacker, being forced to shoot her own family. Each one is brutal, unrelenting, but she pushes through, breaking the illusions faster than any initiate before her. Then, the final fear. She is back in the Dauntless compound. G9 stands before her, a syringe in her hand, her expression one of calculated interest. "You can't control me," Triss says, but her voice wavers. G9 smiles. "Are you sure?" Triss turns and sees her mother standing behind her, eyes pleading. "Triss," her mother says softly, "choose them." Triss hesitates. G9 steps closer. "You are dangerous, Beatrice," she says. "But you don't have to be. Give in and this will all be over." Triss grips her head, trying to shake the illusion away. But this fear is deeper than the others. The fear of losing herself. The fear of betraying who she is. Then she remembers what 4 told her. "We can't let them win." She takes a breath, steadying herself. "This isn't real," she whispers. G9 disappears. The simulation dissolves, and then it is over. She stumbles out of the chamber, gasping for air. The room spins around her, but she forces herself to stand tall. The scientists murmur to one another, eyes wide. No one has ever finished the simulation that fast. Eric steps forward, glancing at G9 before speaking. "Congratulations," he says, though his tone lacks any real warmth. "You have completed your initiation." Triss barely has time to process what just happened before 4 appears at her side, gripping her arm. "We need to leave," he murmurs. Now, she doesn't ask questions. She follows. They retreat to an empty hallway and 4 spins toward her. His expression is tight with urgency. G9 knows. Triss's stomach drops. "She saw how fast you moved through the simulation," 4 continues. "She's not stupid. She's been looking for divergents, and you just proved you're one of them." Triss swallows hard. "What do we do?" 4 glances around, lowering his voice. "We have to stop her." "From what?" "From taking control of Dauntless." The pieces fall into place all at once. The serum modifications, the testing, the constant surveillance. G9 isn't just looking for divergence, she's planning something bigger. Then the sirens blare. The entire Dauntless compound erupts into chaos. The sound is deafening, bouncing off the metal walls, sending soldiers scrambling. Triss and Four exchange a look. This isn't a drill. They rush toward the main hall, where Dauntless soldiers are gathering information. Their eyes are blank, their movements stiff. Triss freezes. Something is wrong. Then she sees the syringes. The Dauntless soldiers have been injected with the new serum, G9 serum. She turns to Four. She's controlling them. Before she can say anything else, the soldiers move. Like a single machine, they march forward, weapons raised. The attack has begun. Triss fights her way through the compound, dodging bullets, avoiding the glassy-eyed soldiers who once trained beside her. The Dauntless have become G9's army, and she will use them to seize power. The faction system is unraveling. The peace is over. By the time she reaches her family, she is too late. Her mother is already wounded, her father fighting desperately to hold the line. They make it out, but at a terrible cost. The war has begun. And Triss is no longer just fighting to survive. She is fighting to end G9's rule. She is no longer just an initiate. She is Divergent, and she will not be controlled. Divergent is a story of identity, courage, and rebellion. It is about breaking free from the mold society places on us, about questioning the systems that seek to control our thoughts and actions. Veronica Roth's world is both captivating and unsettling, pulling readers into a dystopian reality where choice is a dangerous thing. Triss's journey from a quiet, uncertain girl to a warrior willing to fight for what is right is one of the most compelling transformations in modern young adult fiction. Her struggles feel real, her pain and triumphs deeply personal, and the world of Divergent is one that lingers in the mind, raising questions about power, conformity, and the price of freedom. But Triss's story is far from over. In Insurgent, the second book in the series, the battle intensifies. Betrayals, secrets, and deeper truths await as the fight against Erudite escalates. The war for the future has begun.